Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Coding in Healthcare Summer School, organized by the Clinician Engineer Hub and CodeMed. It is my pleasure to have you all with us, and it's really good to see the number of participants joining in and to see the interest that you've all shared in thinking about how the world of coding and programming can be used in a dynamic setting like healthcare. I am Faisal Nawaz, and I am a final year medical student based in Dubai, and I'm also the strategy lead for the Clinician Engineer Hub. Joining me today is Dr. Aaron Thind and Dr. Imran Qureshi, who are both representing CodeMed and have taken their time so that we can have this organized workshop in learning more about the basics of programming. And hopefully you can all come out with some idea about how exciting the world of creating apps and designing innovation within healthcare can be. We have this event organized as part of both the Clinician Engineer Hub, which is based in the UK, and CodeMed, together working on really showcasing how, as future healthcare professionals, it is important to embrace the world of technology, and that includes programming as well. So with the rise in medical technologies and the impact of programming in healthcare, this interactive workshop will take you through the fundamentals of Java programming and help you solve some key problems within clinical practice. And more than just that, I think it's going to be a fun experience where we can all engage with each other, have an interactive environment, and hopefully take back some of these skills within our universities, hospitals, and working environments. I'm happy to bring Dr. Aaron and Dr. Imran on stage. And just as a brief background, Dr. Aaron is a junior doctor and a co-founder at CodeMed and the deputy lead of emerging technology at the Department of Health and Social Care. He is a Digital Health London Fellow and an NHS clinical entrepreneur. Dr. Imran, who's also with us, is also a co-founder of CodeMed and has a background in computer science and holds a number of roles in healthcare and management. At Croydon University Hospital, he's a consultant in infection, associate medical director, and a foundation year 1 program director. Outside of the NHS, Dr. Imran has been appointed as a principal medical consultant for Amazon, along with other disciplinary roles at the digital pathology program, as well as quality improvement and as an NHS clinical entrepreneur. So to both Dr. Imran and Dr. Aaron, welcome, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Faisal. And thank you everyone for joining us today on your Sunday afternoon. It shows a genuine commitment to wanting to improve your skills and improve healthcare. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to share my screen. But before I do that, I'm just popping something in the chat because it's just a web link that we're going to be using later. So don't worry about that right now. So can everyone see my screen okay? Yeah. Yeah, brilliant. Fine. So welcome everyone to the programming workshop, which is co-hosted by the Clinician Engineer Hub and CodeMed. So just a bit more information about what we do. So essentially, we're a group of clinicians that have a real passion for solving healthcare challenges through digital innovation. And that's why essentially we set up CodeMed. And our mission is to push the boundaries of what healthcare professionals can create and achieve using digital innovation. So there's 3 of us that are involved in creating CodeMed. So there's myself, and like Faisal said, I'm currently working as the Deputy Lead of Emerging Technology at the Department of Health, soon to be starting GPST1 at St Thomas's Hospital. And I'm also an NHS clinical entrepreneur and a Digital Health London Fellow. Joe Hogan is also a co-founder. He unfortunately will be joining us a bit later because he's post-nights, but he's currently working as an ICU clinical fellow, and he's a self-taught Java and Flutter programmer. And Imran, well, the credentials speak for themselves, really. There's not even enough space to fit all the text and all of his credentials. But you can see he's a microbiology consultant, a principal medical consultant for Amazon, a UCL honorary professor, an NHS clinical entrepreneur, and he's a computer science by background. And one thing that's really worth noting is that 2 years ago, Joe and I had absolutely no programming experience whatsoever. I did a little bit of A-level ICT, but other than that, I never did any actual programming. And Imran was actually the one that taught us 2 years ago. And, it's an amazing skill. Look at where we are now. I can genuinely say that a lot of the positions that I have now, I never would have got had I not learned to code and been able to achieve the things that I have done. So thank you for that, Imran. And as well as teaching other healthcare professionals how to code, we also build apps ourselves. So the first app we built together was an Antibiotic Calculator App. You can see on the bottom right. So we found out essentially that gentamicin, amikacin, vancomycin, teicoplanin are frequently poorly prescribed in trusts, NHS trusts. And we actually did an audit which showed that around 12% of gentamicin prescriptions out of 6,000 prescriptions we audited, 12% were prescribed at 1.5 times the dose that they should have been given, which obviously risks renal toxicity and also toxicity of the ototoxicity. And of course, it's a completely avoidable patient risk. So we created this app which reduced prescribing errors down to 0 and also reached the finals of the Health Tech Network or Health Tech Newspaper Awards. More recently, we've also released an app called IALS, which you can actually, those of you who have iPhones, you can download on the App Store, just type in IALS. And essentially it's designed to streamline the management of in-hospital cardiac arrests and reduce the impact of human factors. And those of you who've got an Android phone, we'll be releasing an app for that shortly. And one of the more recent apps we've been working on is something called Simepr, which is on the top here. And essentially, it's a mock EPR system that's designed to be used during simulation training. So eliminating the use of paper records, paper drug charts, which are not realistic. You can do your simulation training with paper records, but actually in real life, when you're a doctor, you'll be using electronic systems. So this is a customizable EPR system where you can create clinical scenarios for teaching purposes. And it's currently being used at Bart's Hospital, Bart's NHS Trust, East Surrey Hospital and Croydon University Hospital. And it's worth noting that all of these things we've built ourselves. It's costed us absolutely nothing to build because we haven't paid for a developer. So we've gone straight from idea to building a fully functional product that's being used in real clinical settings, which is amazing to be able to do that. So why are we so passionate about digital health? Well, it's kind of obvious, when you look around, no matter where you look, digitization has radically transformed practically every industry. I mean, you can't even go to Sainsbury's now without having to use one of those computers to scan your shopping items. You want to buy something, you can hop onto Amazon app and buy something, get it delivered the next day. Like everywhere you look around, digitization is there. And healthcare is no different. And in fact, digital is mentioned over 90 times in the NHS long-term plan. It's a real drive to digitize healthcare. And we believe in order to fully harness it, the users, being yourselves as clinicians and medical students, you must be able to understand, adopt, create, and improve services in order for us to actually effectively use this technology. And that's why it's so important that people like yourselves have an understanding of how software works, how to code, how to build solutions. So you are essentially the key to this digital health solution. And there's also another way to think about it. So when there's a motive, there's an opportunity. And we know there's a motive for digitization in healthcare. And this gives you an opportunity to do various things. So if you're an academic person, there's a lot of research around digital health technology. So a couple of years ago, I published some research with a colleague on the use of mobile health apps in surgery. There's also opportunities in terms of businesses and startups. So if you're able to build a product that you can demonstrate saves money you can build a business based on that, because you can say to an NHS trust, well, I'm saving you this much money. If you pay me this much money, you're still saving money in order for this service. And that's how you get a viable business. And then last of all, there's the clinical portfolio side of things. And I mentioned before, well, all three of us hold a number of positions that are related to innovation and digital health. And having that programming experience, being able to demonstrate that we've built apps and improved healthcare, has definitely helped us with our portfolios. Recently, both Joe and I, very pleased to say, got our first choice placements at St Thomas Hospital for our respective training specialties. So it's a hugely useful skill to have in your portfolio, to talk about in interviews and have on your CV. So I don't know if Imran wanted to add anything, and I just want to also say hi to Joe, because he's now joined us.
Hi everyone, nice to meet you all.
Brilliant.
I didn't really have that much to add at all. I think Aaron's been very holistic in his overview of what's been happening, and certainly, and I think they've been doing this for 2.5 years, and this was one of my expectations, that once clinicians who are genuinely engaged in digital tech, when they really get involved, they'll produce some amazing things, and certainly Aaron and Joe are testament to that. But it's interesting, until you sort of explore this area, you don't really get a whole sense of what you can achieve. And whilst I did my computer science degree probably before some of you might have even been born, or probably not quite, maybe it's possible. I remember, it's really funny, I did medicine straight after computer science, and my mother used to say to me, she said, "Oh, your computer science degree, what a waste of 3 years that was." And I always sort of turn back to her and say, no, everything happens for a reason. We all go through a path for a reason. So it's come good in the end. And I think now is really the time where digital tech is taking off in a massive way. And I think for all of you, for those who have med students, for those of you who are not, I mean, it doesn't really matter where you are in your career. You can pick it up and get going. And even now on the course that we're currently running, we've got four consultants on it. So, at least 2 of them are older than I am. So it's never too late to learn anything. And really, this is a great opportunity to start. So I hope that you're going to enjoy this course.
Yep,
okay, so
thank you for sharing that, Dr. Imran. And just wanted to sort of, again, echo on that same thing, which is the importance of investing time and efforts into growing beyond just the core path that we think we're on, but then keeping those doors open and then seeing how they open up in different ways, maybe years down the lane, is the way to go. And having all 3 of you with us today is a testament of that. So thank you for the time that you've shared. And one small thing that I'd like to share is just with regards to any questions or any comment that comes along, we have our chat box that's open. So feel free to message in, and one of us would be there to assist you. And then again, I think we have Aaron and the team taking care of any other thing that might come on. Thank you.
excellent. So I guess we should now let's get cracking on what you all came here for. Let's learn how to code. So just a bit of background. Generally, no matter what programming language you intend to learn, we're going to be teaching Java, which is a language that you can build desktop apps, so computer apps, as well as like Android apps as well. But we're going to be sticking to the computer app side of things. So no matter what language you want to learn, you're generally speaking, you're going to need 2 things. So firstly is the development kit. So in Java, it's called the Java Development Kit, or JDK. And essentially, it's a piece of software that allows your computer to understand the language, basically the Java language or Python or whatever language you want to write in. So that's the piece of software that you need to download. And I'm happy to provide links for this later. And we actually help you on our programming course, the 12-week one that we offer. We will give you a set of instructions to how to download these respective softwares. So that allows, the Java Development Kit allows your computer to understand Java. And then the second piece of software you need is something called an IDE. And And essentially it's an app or like a computer program that allows you to actually type in the script, like the programming language. So you're essentially writing on it, your code, and then you run it and you can produce whatever apps you want. So just as an example of now, this what I'm writing on here. This is all Java, okay? And I've obviously installed the Java development kit. And what I'm writing all this code in is called the IDE. So this is Visual Studio Code, or VSC. And there's a few others out there. There's NetBeans, which I used to love, but it's getting a bit outdated for me now. And there's also Eclipse and IntelliJ. You know, they all pretty much do the same thing, to be honest. But obviously we don't have time to download all of this. So we've got a workaround. So there's something called an online IDE. So here it allows us to do relatively kind of basic things, which is fine for this workshop. And you can type in your code and run it, and it'll come up with whatever your code is. So I've posted a link in the chat for this online IDE. The alternative, if you for some reason it's not working, if you just type in online IDE Java into Google, right, and then just click on the first link, it will take you there. So if you all do that, I'll give you a few moments just to get that set up. It doesn't have to be on Safari, it can be on any browser. So it can be on Google Chrome, whatever you're using, it should work fine. Everyone manage that okay? Just post in the chat if you've got any troubles, we can help you out with that.
Yeah, Aaron, do you mind just resharing the same link again into the chat? It might have actually gone back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem, no problem.
Thanks.
I will paste that in. There we go. Okay, so what are we going to be building today? So essentially, if I show you this app here, okay. So this is an app that, so as part of our, you know, we offer this 12-week programming course for healthcare professionals. And one thing that we really try to do is make it as clinically orientated as possible. So the only apps you'll be building are kind of digital health, the clinically useful apps. So like creatinine clearance, gentamicin calculator, CT head interpretation tool for head injuries, etc. So everything we do is always clinically orientated. And we believe that by teaching these kind of abstract concepts, you know, they are quite abstract, but by comparing them to clinical examples, things that we understand, like, you know, actually helps us learn it. So this is a creatinine clearance calculator, something similar to what we teach as part of our programming course. And, you know, you can type in the age, set the weight, just making these numbers up. And then you click calculate and it will come up with your creatinine clearance and etc. So what we're going to do is the actual graphical user interface stuff. That's one aspect of programming, but then there's also kind of what's happening in the background, what you don't see on the screen. So this graphical user interface stuff we teach quite kind of later on in the course, because you need to know the basic concepts before you go straight into the graphical user interface stuff. So what we're going to code today is what is going on in the background behind this button. So when you click this button, all the processes and the calculations and decisions that are going on in the background, okay? So, and this is kind of a bit like what the code would look like, okay? It's going to look like absolute nonsense to you right now, but don't worry about that. By the end of this course or this workshop, you'll understand it. And we're going to go everything kind of in step by step, okay? All of these concepts. So this particular exercise with the creatinine clearance calculator, we use a number of kind of coding concepts. So we've got the classes and main methods, we've got variables, creating variables, arithmetic, and then if-else statements. And like I said, we're going to be going through each of these steps with you today. So if we go to your online IDE, okay, don't make any changes yet. Don't change anything. Don't mess around with any of the text already there. Just have a look at what's there though. So we've got something that says public class hello world online 1, okay, and then we have a set of these brackets, Okay, so if we just go back to that, so this on line 1, public class hello world, followed by these brackets here, is called the class declaration. Okay, and the brackets form a body almost. So the way I like to think of it is the class, by saying public class hello world, you're creating a room, right? You're creating a room that has, and the walls are basically determined by these curly brackets. Okay, so just visualize that in your head. Then on the following line, line 4, okay, there's this very strange piece of text that says public static void main string square brackets args. Okay, and again, that's followed by another set of curly brackets. So you see on line 5 and line 7. So hopefully you're seeing a pattern here that these curly brackets almost form like a almost like a set of walls where you can separate the text. And you'll see it's slightly indented as well, so we can quite clearly see that this is within these brackets here. Okay. Now, this line 4 is called a main method declaration. All right. So now we've got this class declaration. So we've got this class, which is like a room, a box. Okay. And inside this box, we've got a main method declaration with a kind of like another box inside of it formed by these curly brackets. All right. So the way that's really useful to think about it is the class is this room, and the main method allows your computer to know where it needs to be entering this room from. So if we look at this diagram here, so without the main method, if you have a class with just a bit of code in it, the code won't run. Okay, it will just crash because it doesn't know where the computer needs to start reading. Okay, so the main method says, all right, we're reading from here downwards. So it will start from, so you'll see this main method and it will start reading from the top of this curly bracket downwards. Okay, and the code needs to be within that. So the code has to be within these 2 brackets here. Anything outside of it, well, at least for the context of this session, anything outside of that, the computer doesn't really read it. Okay. And then inside of this line 6, okay, so if we go back to this IDE, on line 6, we have something called a print statement. Okay. And this essentially, I mean, I think back in the kind of days when they had really early computers, this would actually print to like a printer or something like that, or a very, we didn't have the kind of graphical user interfaces with like buttons and things like that, like we have now back in those days. So it might print out to one of these printers or print on like a terminal, which is like this thing on the right. Okay. And essentially that's where the output gets sent to. So if I run this piece of code, you'll see it prints out hello world. Okay. And what you'll notice is that there's a semicolon at the end here. Okay, but not on the end here and here. So semicolon basically for commands like this, or generally, if there's not a if there's a function like this or this that's followed by a set of curly brackets, okay, then there's no semicolon at the end. All right. But in this case, there isn't. This particular command doesn't. So you need to have a semicolon at the end. So the computer knows that's the end of that particular statement. Okay. And like I said, it always needs to be inside the main method. Because if I move this out, and again, don't do what I'm doing because it will mess up your. So if I do this and I move this outside like that, it just crashes. It just says there's errors. It doesn't know what's going on. Okay. So make sure all of your code stays within here. And it's always good to make sure you're getting the tabs right. So you can just press tab and it will tab it in. So whenever something is inside these curly brackets, it should be tabbed. Okay. So you can see. So hopefully that's making any sense. If people have any questions, I see there are a couple of questions in the chat actually. Okay, that's fine. Brilliant. So hopefully that's all making sense. So let's do something with it. Let's try and change this around a little bit. So if we just take out this piece of text here, okay, and write your name for example. So I'm going to say, hello, Aaron. Just put an exclamation mark here. And I have to say, one thing that's worth mentioning is that you have to be very pedantic in programming. So everything has to be very precise. If you make a small mistake, if you get something missing, for example, I missed the print line there, I missed the end there. If I run this, it doesn't work, it crashes. If I miss out the semicolon, it will crash. Yeah. If I miss out these quotation marks, which I'll talk about what they are in a minute, it will also crash. Okay. So you need to make sure everything is very precise. So have a crack at that. Hopefully it should run completely fine. Yeah, and if there's any errors in your code, what you can literally do, and you're not sure why it's not working, just copy this and paste in the chat like I'm going to do now. Okay. And either myself, Joe, or Imran will have a quick look at it and we can tell you what's missing. And just bear in mind, you have to click this button on the top left to run the code. Okay, so hopefully everyone's done that. Now, I'm going to explain this in a little bit more detail. So system.out.print prints out the piece of text, okay? This ln at the end means that it prints to a new line. So don't copy what I'm going to do. I'm just showing this for demonstration's sake. I'm going to change this to, this. So we've got two print statements. And if I run this, it'll print to two different lines, okay? But if I take these ln's out, it will print to the same line. So that's what that ln means. And delete that. Now, we then have these brackets here, these normal brackets. So they're not curly brackets, they're just these normal ones, okay? And within that, it contains a piece of text. Now, this piece of text has to be in quotation marks because it's something that's called a string. Now, a string is a type of variable. It's like a data type, really. And essentially, by you're denoting that this is a string by putting it in quotation marks. So strings are always in quotations. Because if I take these out, the computer no longer knows what this is. It doesn't know what type of data it is. It's getting confused. So if I run this, it comes up with an error. Okay. So when you're printing out a piece of text that you want, that needs to be in quotation marks. So if I put that back in. So I mentioned this thing called a string, okay? And this is quite common across various other programming languages as well. So I don't know if any of you have had any experience with other languages, but things like, Python, Flutter, a lot of these other languages, they have the same type of variables, so data types, strings and integers and stuff. There's quite a few different types. So these are the most kind of common ones that you use, and it's not an exhaustive list. So we've got a string, which is here. Essentially, like we said before, it's a set of characters. So for example, code med or 1, 2, 3. Okay. But there's also a few others. So there's something called an integer, which is a whole number. Okay. So for example, 55. Now, one thing that's worth noting is that there is a difference between 55 as an integer and 55 as a string. So 55 as a string is literally just the text 5, 5. It doesn't mean anything else. It's just the characters. Whereas 55 as being an integer means the actual value 55. Okay, that's the difference. So your computer can't add 55 plus 20 when they're both strings. Okay, it won't know. But if it's an integer, it knows the inherent value of each of those numbers and will be able to add them together. I'm just skipping over to a double. So double is kind of like an integer. It's a number, except it's a decimal. So an integer is a whole number. A double is a number with a decimal. So for example, 55 is an integer, but 55.0 would be a double. 55.1, 55.2, 21.5. These are all doubles, okay? And it's not just one decimal place, it can be a whole load of decimal spaces. And then last of all is Boolean, which is quite a funny name if you haven't heard of it before. And essentially it's just true or false. This is something, for example, we use in one of our lessons in our programming course. You use Boolean for the CT head decision algorithm. So, you know, loss of consciousness is a bit true or false, vomiting, true or false, evidence of basal skull fracture, true or false. So that's also really useful to use. But in order to use these variables, you need to declare and initialize them. Okay, so now what we're doing is we're creating containers that can store data. Okay, so for example, let's say I didn't want to put text directly into here. And again, don't copy what I'm doing here. You'll have a chance to do it in a moment. So we know that this is a string. Okay, so I'm going to make a variable which is a string, and I'm going to call it. So this is the data type string with a capital S. I'm going to then give it a name. Okay, so welcome message. And remember, just something to note, all your variables, this is something called camel case. So the first letter is lowercase. So your variables should always be a lowercase to start with. And then you can't have spaces, otherwise it comes up with an error. So they all have to be one word. Okay. And same with this, has to be one word. And just so you can read it easier, we use a capital letter if there's instead of a space for the next word. So I've initialized this variable. It's a container almost that's containing welcome message. And then I can assign a value to it. So welcome message equals okay. So if I run this, it shouldn't be a surprise that it's actually not going to change it. It's not going to change the code. So it's still saying, we're still printing out hello Aaron. It's not, we've made this variable. We haven't actually used it. We haven't told the computer, you know, we want you to do something with it. But let's say I took this out, okay, and put in welcome message. All right. And then I run this. Now it's changed. Okay. So now it's taking, so this is almost, this is a container we've created holding a string value. We've put this string inside of it. And now we can use it. So we can call it in this print statement. So it prints out. So you can see when I highlight this, it's highlighting that and that because it knows that's the variable that I'm using. So I'm using this variable to contain this particular piece of data, and then I'm using it. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, I told you before to put things in a quotation marks, right? Now, if I do this and I run it, you just get welcome message because this is now no longer the variable welcome message, okay? This is now a piece of string. So now it's just interpreting this as the characters. It's just saying, oh, you're saying you want me to print out literally welcome message, okay? Whereas when it hasn't got the quotation marks in it, you're actually referring to something different. You're referring to this variable that you've made. So there's a difference between putting, that's how things change when you put things in quotation marks versus not putting them in quotation marks. So hopefully that's making some sense. And again, if there's any questions, feel free to pop in the chat because it is a slightly strange concept. And this diagram here just, again, goes into it in a bit more detail. So the step one is the variable declaration. So string patient. So we've got a different name for it this time. You can call it anything you want. It doesn't have to be this name it's just a tag that you're assigning to it so that you can refer to it later. And they always have to be different. So each variable you create has to have a unique tag on it so you can call it. Otherwise the computer gets confused. It's like, which patient are you talking about? Even if they're different variable types. So variable type is string, variable name is patient. And remember, there's a semicolon at the end, okay? So the computer knows that's the end of that particular statement. Then step two is initializing that variable. So that's basically putting a value inside of it. So let's say patient equals Steve. And these are in quotation marks because it's a string we're putting inside of it. And the semicolon at the end, again, referring to the end of that particular statement. So now by doing that, we've created a container which is named patient. Okay, that's the tag that we've assigned to it. And this container is holding a string inside of it, which is Steve. So the same concept is here. And like I was saying before, when you're putting things in the print statement, you need to make sure that the text that you're putting in is not in is in quotation marks, because if you don't, this will throw an error. See, coming up with a whole lot of errors, doesn't know what's going on. So what I'd like you to do now is create a string, okay, a variable of type string. Call it anything you want. I don't really mind. You can name it whatever you want, as long as it's consistent. So this needs to all be the same. So then you've got the string, put your name inside that variable, or do something like I've done here, whatever you want, anything, and then print it out, okay, by calling that variable that you created, just like here. And like I said, make sure everything is inside these two curly brackets, okay? And try and get everything neat, make sure everything's tabbed out, so it's looking exactly like this, okay? So give you guys some time to have a crack at that. Okay, so hopefully, looks like a lot of people have been cracking out some of the code and it's looking pretty good. Okay. So for those of you who maybe didn't want to comment or maybe a little bit stuck, what I can do is just paste the code in here that I've got, and you can just have a look at it if you'd like. But we're going to start moving on a little bit now. So there's something in programming called commenting, okay? And that's essentially denoted by using two of these / brackets. And it's a really useful way to kind of, well, essentially it comments your code. So you can put messages on there and things like that. And it allows, you know, in this particular scenario, the code is 14 lines long, but, you know, Joe, Imran, and I routinely write bits of code that are hundreds, even thousands of lines of code long. So that is where things get really, really difficult to find where you are and find out. You could literally write something 2 weeks ago and completely forget like what exactly you were doing with that piece of code. And this is where comments are really handy, because it's a useful way of it kind of highlighting not only to yourself, but to anyone else who reads your code, what it is that you're trying to do. Now, these comments aren't actually read by the programming. So by having these two brackets here, you see it's changed color a little bit. So the computer knows it's a comment, and it will essentially ignore any of the text that's in there. Hold on. So if I say, so variable declarations here, okay? And then I can also comment variable initialization, and you can also print something out as well. It's a really handy way to make it clear as to what you're doing. Okay, so there's also something in your print statement. You don't have to just print out one thing, okay? You can, you know, the print statement, you can combine bits of things together, and it's called concatenation, all right? So let's say I want to add something else onto here. So it's denoted by using a plus sign, all right? Now, if I had another variable, I could just type the other variable name here, okay? But I want to add a particular, just add a string to it, okay? So I can use, again, another set of quotation marks, all right? So I've got my variable welcome message, okay? I've got this plus sign, which essentially is saying to Java, I want to put these two things together, okay? And then I have my string that I want, okay? And again, make sure it's in quotation marks, all right? Again, so don't do anything just yet, just keep watching what I'm doing. And again, you'll have a chance to do this yourself, all right? So if I run this, it'll do this. And one thing you'll notice in this output is that there's no space, okay? And, you know, I like things to be neat. I like things to be the way that I want them to be. So I don't like that. I want to change that. Now I could add loads of spaces here, okay, and run that. It's not changed at all. It's not going to make a difference. And the reason for that is because even a space, so a space bar counts as a character. Like programmatically on your keyboard, the space is part of a string. Like, so if I put a space here, okay, and then I run that, you now see there's a space there, which is much neater. I like that a lot more. So now what I want you to do is use this concept. So you will have your welcome message. I want you to use this concatenation concept to add another string to your message. Okay, it doesn't have to be what I've done. It can be anything you want. That's the beauty of programming. You can do anything you want. So just have a crack at that. I'll give you a few minutes. as before, if there's any problems, feel free to just drop a message in the chat with your code. Okay, cool. Fine. So again, like before, I'm just going to copy this code, paste it in the chat, just in case anybody had any issues. Okay. So if you did want to use it, you just literally just copy it. You can delete what's in here, and you can paste it, and it should work fine. But make sure you delete everything, because you don't want to duplicate the class or the main method and stuff. Fine. So, like I said before, there's more than just strings when it comes to variables. You know, you can have integers, doubles, Boolean, and these are just some examples as to how that hopefully you'll see a pattern here actually, that the initialization and the declaration, they're all the same, right? But you're just saying what the variable is, which is different, okay? And all these variables, every variable you make will need to have a different name, okay? So the computer can recognize them. And this essentially is like the kind of bread and butter what programming is. It's essentially like storing and processing bits of data, right? So, you know, everything you do, even as a doctor, you're taking data in, you know, the OBS or something like that, their blood results, and then you're processing it and making a decision. And that's exactly what programming is in many ways. And that's why you have these variables, and, you know, you're storing variables with these kind of containers with information and then using them. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to make an integer. Okay. So, and one thing that's really useful to have is keep the variables that you're creating, the variable declarations, initializations at the top of your code. Okay. And then when you're processing them, have them afterwards, because your computer only reads downwards. Okay. So for example, if I copy all this, again, don't copy what I'm doing because it'll mess up your code. But if I do this, okay, it's going to come up with an error. And if you think about it, the computer's reading downwards, right? Just like, you know, you would read a book from start to finish. You'd read, you know, left to right, and you'd go down each line. Okay, the computer does exactly the same thing. And now let's say we were both reading a book, and I was asking you, and you'd only got to the first or second page, and I'd finished the book, right? And then I start asking you questions about the final chapter in this book, and you're like, well, I don't know, I haven't even read that part of the book yet, so I can't tell you. This is the same. In this particular situation, I have asked this computer to use this variable before it's even read that it needs to be made and put a value inside of it, if you know what I mean. So essentially I'm saying, oh yeah, print this thing out. And the computer will be like, I don't know what this variable is, because, you know, and that's because I haven't even made it by the time I used it. So you've got to make sure everything's in chronological order. And that's why it's really good habit to just get into just creating your variables at the top, and then any processing that goes on or outputs, then have that at the bottom of your code. Okay, so I'm going to make an integer, and you'll notice that it's a lowercase I. Okay, for some reason a string has a capital S, whereas integer, Boolean, all these other ones don't have a capital. So I'm going to change this to name. I'm going to have this as age. And I'm now going to have another line here. Age equals 28. And there's two things. You'll notice that this is a slightly different color, okay? Because it now knows that this isn't a string, this is an integer. And the reason for that is because partly because I haven't put it in quotation marks. Can you see here, there's quotation marks for the string, but for age, there isn't, because it's a value. So it's the computer knows that this is the value 28 rather than just the characters. Now I'm going to change this to is aged. And then I'm going to add an add sign because I'm concatenating all these variables together. I'm going to put age here. And I can need to change this. So it's coming with an error. Everything needs to be the same. Okay. So I changed this from welcome message to name. So these all need to be named. And there you go. Doesn't quite make sense. How are you? I'll say hi, Aaron. So hopefully this will make a bit more sense. There you go. So now what we've done here is we've created an integer and we've put them all together in this print statement. Okay, and it's the same for double and Boolean. You know, it's just it's exactly the same pattern. So we'll be creating a double using doubles later. So don't worry about that, but Boolean is exactly the same. So there's also arithmetic function that Java has. So I'm going to go back and delete all this. Okay. Right. I'm going to go back to this string name and I'm going to delete everything that's in here and just leave name. And that will just print Aaron. So what I'm going to do now is, well, actually, let's make this an exercise for you guys. So what I want you to do is have this, okay? You can write it yourself if you want, or I'll paste it in the chat just to give you a bit of a head start. Now, what I want you to do is create and initialize two extra integers. So I want you to have well, no, not integers, doubles. Okay, so like this, okay, double. So I want you to have a double for height and a double for weight. Okay, don't do anything with it in the print statement. Just have these two here and then declarations here and then the two initializations here. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. So you're going to have a double height and just put any kind of value you want and a double for weight, and you can put a value inside of that. So I'll leave you guys to get cracking on with that. And again, yeah, just post it in the chat if you've got any issues. So I've noticed there's a couple of people who might have just joined. So I'm just posting, again, the link for this IDE so you can type in your code. And if you just copy and paste the code that I sent just before this message, you'll be able to hit the ground running. So for the interest of time, let's get moving. So like I said, what we're going to be doing is creating two doubles for height and weight. Okay, so yeah, double height, double weight. Okay, same pattern as before. Then we're going to initialize our variables and just put a value in basically. So height equals 1 point, how tall am I? 1.74. And then weight, not sure how much I weigh, but I think it's around 70 kilograms. So you can't put units in the end, so you can't do 1.74 meters. That won't work. It has to be just the number, okay? And this, even though it's 70, you can write 70, that's fine. It will convert it to 70.0 anyway, because it's a double. So, and again, you can't put the units there, that will. So this needs to be just the way it is. To make it, if you wanted to be like really neat with it, you could say, you could comment it like this. Okay. And that can, tell, let's say Imran was reading my code. He would know that these are the units. Okay. So if anyone hasn't managed to do that, I can copy this and paste it in the chat. You can copy and paste that into your code if you haven't managed to do that. So if I run this, it doesn't really do anything. It just prints out name because I haven't done anything else. I haven't done anything with these variables. Okay. And what I want to do is calculate the BMI. And so what's nice about Java, you also do kind of mathematical functions and things, which is really useful, especially in a clinical kind of context, because a lot of the stuff we do, particularly from a kind of pharmacology kind of side of things, a lot of it is calculations, drug dosing and syringe driver dosing, all those kind of things require various calculations. So as you all probably know, BMI is weight divided by height squared, right? So that's very simple to do. But what we're going to need to do is create another variable so that we can put this inside. So double BMI, okay? And then we can put this value in there. So if I say double BMI, so now we're putting all nice and neat, all of our variable declarations at the top. And then I'm going to kind of separate this a little bit. I'm just going to say calculate BMI. So now I'm calling this variable here, which is again a double. So 70, oh no, sorry, weight, okay, this variable divided by, so it's denoted by a slash. And then we can have height times height. So that's basically squaring it. And times isn't an X, okay, that won't work. It has to be that star. So usually it's shift 8 on your keyboard. And don't forget the semicolon at the end of all of these statements, okay? Semicolons need to be at the end of all of these statements. If I run this, oh, I haven't done anything with it yet. So it does print out the BMI. You can see here. it's a big decimal space, big decimal number of decimal places. Don't worry about that. We can do something for that in just a moment. So don't you fret about that. For those of you who like to be very neat about things. But the key thing here is that we've created some variables, 4 variables, okay? One of which is a string, 3 of which are doubles, okay? We've put the value in the string and the height and weight doubles. And then we've done a calculation, which we've put into the BMI double, and then printed that out, essentially. So have a crack at that if you haven't already started it, and see if you can get that working. Okay, cool. So hopefully everyone was managing that okay. Just like before, I'll copy this, paste it in the chat if there is anyone who had any troubles. Cool. So that's great. And essentially, you know, these arithmetic functions that you can do can get increasingly complicated. So, I mean, a BMI is relatively straightforward, but it can be, you know, even more complex as much as you want, really. So let's do something that's a little bit more advanced. Let's try and make a creatinine clearance calculator. Oh, actually, before that, I wanted to show you something actually. So first of all, let's say we wanted BMI to be a whole number, because this doesn't look very neat as it is. Okay, and no one needs to know how many decimal spaces it's got. So there might be this thought that you could just maybe make all of these integers. So if I make this an integer and I just copy it, paste it across, okay. You could do that. Well, actually, I can't do that because this is 1.74 meters. Okay, so that's not going to work. But let's say I just happen to be exactly 2 meters, and I really wish I did, but I'm not. All right. This would work. Okay, but like I said, it doesn't. You don't have the decimal spaces. Okay, so you can't really use it. So it has to be a double. But if I made this just an integer, okay, again, that's not going to work because all of these variables here are doubles, okay? And now I'm trying to convert these doubles into a integer. Now, there's some ways that you could in theory do this, but basically, generally speaking, you know, when you're doing these calculations and things, if your calculation involves doubles and things like that, then your output should also be a double to make sure everything is the same data type, for the sake of simplicity at this level. So the question is, how do we actually turn this into a kind of rounded number? Now, there's a function called, it's this math function that Java has. So if I type in math.round and then put BMI into a set of brackets itself, so you'll see there's 2 brackets at the end. That's because this bracket here is part of this. So if I did this and I ran it, then it just rounds it to the nearest whole number. So for me, that looks a lot neater. And, you know, from a user perspective, if you were printing out a result on the screen, you know, for example, in this calculator, you want it to be rounded, really. You don't need to know, you know, all the decimal spaces that are there. So there we have it. So try popping that into your code, seeing if it works. Okay, cool. So let's move on. Now we're going to turn things up a notch a little, and we're going to make a creatinine clearance calculator. So something that's, you know, slightly more advanced than this quite basic calculation. So I'm going to scrap all of this, okay, and refresh the screen. Oh, Faisal, do you think we should take a break, or I'm happy to crack on? If everyone else is happy to go, just give me a thumbs up. If
I think we could have a short break before we jump into the probably the most exciting part of the session right now. So
okay, sure.
it's a good idea, maybe a 5-minute break. And for anyone who's also just joined in, we'll be sharing the link again. In the meantime, any questions are more than welcome in the chat, and we can be back in 5 minutes from now.
All right, sounds good. So what I'll do is I'll keep this screen sharing. I'll stop my video, keep the screen sharing for the next 5 minutes, just in case anyone wants to carry on playing around with the code and wants to have something so they can refer to. That's fine. Okay, I'll be back in 5 minutes. Hello, everyone. If you had a nice little break or had a chance to catch up with some of the programming. I see there's a couple of people who've just joined. So let's just, I'll copy the link for this website, paste it in. Okay, so this is called an online IDE where you can type in all your code and things. And I'll also copy this code just for you to see. We're actually going to be doing something slightly differently now. Moving on to the Creatinine clearances was a BMI calculator. Okay, cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to refresh this whole thing and it will reset everything. Okay. And we'll keep this in for now. Let's call it test. Fine. So what we're going to do now is we're going to switch this up and we're going to make a creatinine clearance calculator. Okay. So there's a couple of variables that we're going to need, a few more. So we're going to need something for age. We're going to need something for weight, a constant. Okay. So in females, this is 1.04, males, this is 1.23. Okay. And we're going to need creatinine. Okay. All these variables. So we're going to need a double for creatinine clearance, a double for age, a double for weight, a double for constant, a double for creatinine. Okay. So what I'm going to do here is so the little exercise for you. I want you to create doubles for age, weight, the constant. Well, actually, we can just call this N, just because it's a bit shorter. So that's the constant, okay, and creatinine. So just how we declared the variables before. So double, age, and then semicolon. We're going to do, I want you to do that for each of these variables here. So if you can, oh, and also creatinine clearance. I'm just going to call it CRCL. So you need doubles for all these. So I want you to crack on with that. Like before, just paste it in the chat if you've got any questions. All right. Okay, I'll give you guys 2 more minutes and then we'll demonstrate it here. Okay, so let's delete this line here. So we're going to actually, I'll keep it here just so we can see. So we're going to have a double for age because it's going to be part of this calculation, right? So we don't want it to be an integer because it's going to be, we want all of our variables to be of the same type. And because we're doing division in particular, there's going to be decimal places involved. So we don't want integers involved in this. Double weight. That's our constant n. Okay, so we've got all of these here. Now, the next step would be to initialize these variables and put like a value inside of them. So for example, age we can say is equal to 50, okay? So we can do that. That's what I taught you how to do before. But actually, there is a way you can do this a little bit quicker. The only reason I showed you to do this was just so structurally in your head, we were splitting these things up. So if you wanted to carry on doing it like this, so you've got age, you're assigning a value for weight, that's absolutely fine. But actually, it's a slightly slow way of doing things. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes programming is about trying to do, a piece of coding in as minimal amount of kind of lines as you can. So it's all about being minimalistic and neat. So we can do things slightly differently. And if I take this semicolon off age, for example, and I put an equal here, I can then just put the value straight inside of it. So I've initialized it and declared it, initialized it all in one line. So you can do that. That's what I tend to do when I'm doing my programming stuff, if I'm putting a value straight into the variable I'm making. So let's do the same for the rest of these. So just remember that it's not, the equals doesn't go after the semicolon, okay? You need to have the equals straight after the variable name and then have a semicolon at the end, okay? So n at the moment, we're going to state what we want n to be, but later on, we're going to do something that allows you to flick between male and female. But for now, let's just make this 1.23. 1.23, which is the male constant, but we are going to change this later. And if you wanted to do female, that's fine as well. It doesn't really matter for the point of this exercise, it doesn't matter. So put in 1.04, 1.23, whatever you prefer. And then the creatinine, let's make it 150. And obviously for this variable, we're not putting anything in it yet. So we could do the calculation straight in here, or later on we could have the calculation just like this. So now what I want you to do is, just like how we did the calculation for the BMI, okay? I want you to try and put this calculation in, okay? So you'll have double CRCL equals, and then put the formula in there, okay? Bear in mind, the whole BODMAS thing, because we've got 140 minus age here, and then times by weight and times by constant, which is n. This needs to stay in brackets, okay? So you need to make sure, otherwise your calculation might go a little bit off if that happens. So try popping that in. I'm going to leave this screen up. Well, how about I put these screens side by side so you can see the calculation and you can see both of them together. And that'll help you with your programming it all in. So there you go. So what I want, like I said, what I want you to do is put the calculation in here. And make sure you've assigned a value to all your variables. And for anyone that needs it, I've just pasted the code so far in the chat. Sorry, I should have said. So if you want to copy something from the Zoom chat, you click to highlight it. So you drag across to highlight the text, and press Control Z or Command Z if you've got a Mac, and that will copy it. If you're used to the normal kind of right click and press copy, that doesn't work on this. You have to highlight it and press Command Z, Command C or Control Z, depending on your computer. Not Z, C, Command C or Control Z. Okay, it seems there's a couple of problems with copying the code. So I just made a Google Doc that has the code pasted in there. So you could literally you should be able to just click on it, copy the code, and then if you need to. Cool. And we can update that as we go along. So let's have a crack at this. So we've got double creatinine clearance, CRCL, equals, so starting with 140 minus age. And conveniently, our variable is called age. So, and then we times that to the weight, which is times by the constant, which we've called n. Okay. And then we can divide that by creatinine. So some of you might have done something that's a bit like this. That's also fine. Technically, you don't really need to, because mathematically it's the same to divide. Even if you divide just n by creatinine and times it by all that, it's the same. So it doesn't really matter. You should still come up with the same result. And obviously, if I run this, it's not going to do very much. It's just going to print out test, right? Because, well, that makes sense because we haven't actually used the variable creatinine clearance. So if we do CRCL and we execute that, then it comes up with 55.35. All right, depending on whether and that might be different depending on whether you use n equals 1.23 or 1.04 for male and female respectively. So hopefully those of you who managed to do that, congratulations, well done. You made your first creatinine clearance calculator, which is amazing. And hopefully you would have come up with 55.35 0.35. Oh, the Google Doc doesn't work. Let's change this. That should work now. I should actually update the code now that we've got something new in here. So if I copy this and I paste it. Oh, you're right. Yeah, my bad. Need to use a variable weight. Well done. Good spot. Just checking that's right, yeah. So you should be able to access that Google Doc now, just in case you need to. So now, if you were to play around with any of these values, the code will change accordingly when you run it. Okay, so let me execute that. The result will change. Now, like I said before, it's good to have a really accurate result, but this is untidy, right? 25.722, 6666. No one needs to know that. So what I'd like you to do now is use the math.round function that I showed you earlier, if you can remember it, in place of this. So Anissa, that's a good question. Why is the above equation not in a bracket altogether? So it doesn't need to be. I think if you were to put this in brackets, it wouldn't change anything. So if you did this, it wouldn't change the result. Okay, so it's the same as you can see. But yeah, for these calculations and stuff, you don't need to have before creatinine. Oh, like you mean like in here? You mean like that? Because math, from a mathematical perspective, before the slash. Yeah, so what I'm saying is, yes, what I said before is you could do that, that'd be perfectly fine. But technically, mathematically, you don't need to do that, because if I did this, for example, right, you'd still get exactly the same result, because it's that whole BODMAS thing. So brackets over, I always forget this, brackets over division,
brackets,
multiplication,
order, division, addition, subtraction.
Right. So because we are just multiplying and dividing, it doesn't matter. If it would be different if we were adding something together, right? Exactly. So that's why we put brackets here. Okay. That's why that's absolutely necessary, because otherwise, if we took this off, you might actually end up getting a completely different. So you get a completely wrong result, right? So you need to make sure the brackets are here. So rounding to 2 decimal points is a little bit more complicated. So math.round is quite good because it rounds the nearest whole value. Now there's 2 ways you can do it. I use something it's a function called decimal format. And I don't think you can do it on this IDE. You need to use the proper software. But I think Imran uses a slightly different way where he uses math.round. But I can't remember off the top of my head what that was, Imran. Yeah. So Imran's going to post it. So Imran's very kindly posted it on the chat. So if we did, funny because that only rounds to one space.
That's because your brackets are wrong in the thing, Aaron. Why don't you just do it separately like I did it as
Yeah,
CLCL?
So essentially by using this again, this will override the value that you put into here, right?
Semicolon, line 14.
Yeah, thanks. So you've created, initialized, and you've done the calculation for creatinine, for CRCL, and then we're overriding what we put in here. So we do this calculation with the value that creatinine clearance is here, and then we pop it back in. So we're taking the value out basically and replacing it with this rounded number. So that will round to one decimal space.
Oh, sorry, change it to 1,000.
So if we change to 1,000, that will do 2, hopefully. Oh, no, it doesn't.
It should do. Is it because it's giving 25 exactly? That's probably why.
Is it times 1,000 divided by 100?
Oh, yes,
Right.
sorry. Times of, hang on, let me just think.
No, that will give
Oh,
it
no,
to
no, that was the wrong number.
It's the other way around, probably.
Hmm.
No, you can extra. You just put an extra bracket there and right at the end. After the 1,000, you put an extra bracket.
No, it doesn't seem to like
100, 100, and 100 should give you 2 decimal places. I'm surprised it's not working.
Yeah. Anyway, it's slightly more complicated to round, and like I said, usually I use something called decimal format, which is you need to import a package, which you can't do on this particular thing. So don't worry about that too much. It's doable. It's just not on here. Fine. So hopefully everyone what was the error? Some bracket. Yeah, you are supposed to get 26 based on these numbers. All right, cool. So hopefully everyone's reached this point. Like before, I will just update the code on our Google Doc. Okay, so for everyone to have a look at. Cool. So what we've done here is the calculation for the creatinine clearance. Okay, but one thing it doesn't do is you have to input the constant for male and female. And like, even on a good day, I'm probably not likely to remember that, right? When I'm dealing with a patient who's septic and has got a crashing renal function. So let's see if we can put a piece of code in that will interpret whether you put in the fact that the patient's female or male, right? And that's something called if statements. So if statements are essentially conditional statements which allow you to implement various options based on conditions that you have imposed, right? So you can input a particular value, for example, BMI, okay? You've got the result. And then you can have an if statement that will action certain commands. So if the BMI was in an overweight category, you can have an if statement that will print out this patient's BMI is overweight. So you're interpreting the result. If it's not, then it will say this patient's BMI is normal or whatever. Or like with a HbA1c result, you might not be able to remember or interpret, what's pre-diabetic and what's the threshold for diabetic. And you can have an if statement that will read that result and interpret it for you based on the conditions that you've input. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get rid of this. Okay. So we're just going to make it double n. All right, delete the variable inside that. I'm going to make a couple of spaces in here. And instead of having a double n just on top here, I'm going to make a string. and we're going to call it sex. So this is either going to be male or female. So let's start with female. So we've made this string, okay? And now what we want to do is have something that interprets whether it's male or female, and it will change the constant accordingly, okay? And then once we've done that, we can then put it into our equation. So we're creating something that's a little bit more dynamic now than what we were making before. And in order to do this, we need to use something called if-else statements, okay? So broadly speaking, this is what it's going to look like here. And like I said, the computer reads downwards, right? So you will have your if statement. And if any of you, use Excel quite a lot, it's kind of similar in concept. So you've got an if statement, and in brackets, you've got a condition, okay? And this condition will be, we want to check, if sex equals male, okay? And I have missed out a bracket at the end here. There should be another bracket here. So this is the condition in the brackets, okay? And then we have, and like I talked about before, these curly brackets which form like a body, like walls, right? If this particular condition is met, then it will action a particular command that's within the body. And here we just want the end value, the constant value, to change accordingly. Now, if this condition isn't met, it will skip to the next one, okay? So you could have another if statement or an else if statement with another condition in there. But because this is just male or female, we can just finish off with an else statement, okay? So if this condition isn't met, it won't action anything in this body here. It will then jump to the next statement, which is just an else statement. We don't need to have a condition at the end of it. So this is like, if this isn't met, we just go straight to this and run the code in here. And that's what the computer will do. It'll never run both of these at the same time, okay? Because if this condition is met, it will skip the else statement. So hopefully that's making sense. I'll show you. So I'll show you in a slightly different example, actually. So let's get rid of all this for now and do something slightly different. So, and let's have, oh, let's change something else. So let's say we've got sepsis, all right? And we need to action something based on whether this is true or false, okay? So let's say, for this particular example, we've got this patient who's septic, all right? And we're gonna have an if statement. So if this particular patient is septic, we want to action a command. So we just have a simple print statement. And I don't know, we can, let's say this is an A&E patient and we need to send this patient stream to resus, okay? Because they're obviously going to be quite an unwell patient. We need to make sure we're getting them, get the sepsis 6 in quickly, antibiotics, fluids, etc. Okay, so if the patient is septic, then we action this command. But if they're not, so else, then I don't know, stream to majors, okay, which is also an A&E. So if I run this, because this patient is septic, it's going to read this, it's going to action this command, and it's going to print that out, and then it's going to skip this because this condition's already been met. If this was false, sorry, it should be equals equals. Oh. Not sure why it's doing that. Oh, there we go. So if sepsis equals true, then it prints out this. If it's not, then it does this. And now I missed out the first equals initially, but this needs to be 2 equal signs. Okay, when you're dealing with Boolean or integers or doubles, you compare the values using 2 equals. So when you're assigning a variable, okay, in this situation, you'll use 1 equal sign. When you're comparing, you'll use 2 equal signs. That's why there's 2 there. Now, what you might be noticing thinking is, well, Aaron, you just used 2 equal signs here, but here you've made things slightly different. You said dot equals, okay? So strings are slightly different in the sense that you don't use equals equals. So if I had in this case, I would need to use dot equals. Semicolon there. That should be status. Oh. There we go. Got there eventually. So when you're doing strings, it's slightly different. Okay. Now, in some instances, you could actually use equals equals, right? But actually, you might find that in some instances, so that does work. In some instances, when you're programming more advanced stuff, sometimes it doesn't work. So it's better practice to use dot equals. So for the sake of learning, I would advise just using dot equals for that. So hopefully that whole concept of conditional statements makes some sense. Now they can get a lot more complicated than what we're doing at the moment, but for the sake of this exercise, and this is probably one of the first times you've ever used if-else statements, I think we're just going to use it at that kind of level. So what I'd like you to do is try and have a crack at putting your if statement here. So you're going to have a string, okay? And you can put whatever you want. And make sure this text has a capital F for the sake of this example. And then you're going to put your if. Okay. So if I copy this, put it in the chat. So you should be able to access that. And I'll put this side by side. So you should be able to do, if you pop this in, but make sure you've got an extra bracket here at the end, because I missed that out. So have a crack at that.